Greetings, everyone. I'm Stephen Lewis with Fated Crossings, and before us on the screen here we have the nativity of Jodi Arias. I have recently become interested in this case. I realize I'm kind of coming to the party late, but when her trial was going on, I wasn't interested in the case. I had all sorts of other stuff going on, and I don't watch too much network television, but I am an avid consumer of crime documentaries on YouTube. I'm a big fan. I'm not a big fan of crime, but I have an interest in criminology. Always have. And the Arias case is significant for several reasons. First of all, as a man, this case horrified me because I think all of us, we look at Travis Alexander, her victim, and we say, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." Now, Travis had some issues. Let's just say that. His issues aren't my issues or probably other dudes' issues, but still, what happened to him is, as a guy, it just chills me. You know what I mean? It's just chilling. So the case is absolutely fascinating, especially when we consider that Jodi herself is a very slight, svelte, slender, diminutive woman. And I've always wondered, how did she overpower him? Doubtless she snuck up on him. Well, now I know a little bit more about the case. I've studied up on it a bit, and I've studied up on the players in the case quite a bit, the offender and the victim. And my goal for this video is to just discuss the nativity of Jodi Arias, and then in a separate video, I'll address Travis Alexander, her victim's chart, and then in a final video, I'll deal with the synastry between these two. So, sort of as a guiding principle of this video, I would like to quote from the Cantiloquy of Claudius Ptolemy. And the third aphorism of good old Claude Ptolemy's book goes like this: "Whosoever may be adapted to any particular event or pursuit," such as stabbing your boyfriend 27 times, cutting his throat, and shooting him in the head, "will assuredly have the star indicative thereof very potent in her nativity." So to nutshell this thing, what Ptolemy is saying is that extraordinary lives will have extraordinary charts, and the extraordinariness of the chart will conform to the extraordinariness of the life. And that is exactly what we have here. So using that aphorism of Ptolemy's as a metric or a guide, we will, or a lodestone as it were, we will examine these nativities to see what the motivating factors were, and also just to see if we can glimpse the trial, the death, and all that good stuff. Now, as far as guilt is concerned, I don't like the idea of trying to assess guilt or innocence from a birth chart. It is not constitutional and is just hinky. But I am convinced, obviously, that the events are in there. So, even if Jodi was innocent, it would show in her chart the murder of Travis Alexander. But of course, she's not innocent. We have the benefit of hindsight. She's pleaded guilty and barely escaped a death penalty. So she's as guilty as sin, guilty as the day is long. And so we can be confident that this is the chart of a murderess, and it should reflect that. In fact, it does. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started, okay? And I always like to start with the ascendant, quite frankly. And Jodi and Travis, they both have similar ascendants. They have very similar charts, actually. This is Travis's chart right here that we're looking at. And I'll switch back to Jodi's, and you can see the similarities. They both have that Taurus ascendant. And these similarities are going to be examined more closely in the part 3, the synastry portion of this presentation, which will come later. But still, I just want you to appreciate how similar these charts are, and especially the Chiron close to the ascendant. Look at that. I mean, I don't really use Chiron all that much, but I got to admit, he's definitely making a case here. This is Travis's chart, and we can see Chiron, tightly conjoined with the ascendant. So that's certainly meaningful. So let's go back to Jodi's chart. She also has Chiron conjoined the ascendant, but her ascendant is in Taurus. Does she seem like a Taurian person to you? She doesn't strike me as overwhelmingly Taurian. Why not? Well, because the 12th part of her ascendant is in Libra, right? Now, first of all, notice that I'm not really constellating her personality through the sun. Not yet. The only reason the sun would factor into her personality and her psychology at all is because it's sextile to the ascendant. The aspect cast by the sun to the ascendant adds a solar method to the motivations of that ascendant, meaning she'll use a solar method that conforms with her sun in order to obtain the goals of this ascendant, which are goals for material security. Material security. Taurus is fixed earth, it's retentive, and it wants things to stay the same always. So we're looking at an individual who's been very promiscuous, and an individual who's had a tumultuous love life, and yet her ascendant tells me that what she wants more than anything is permanence. But the rest of her chart won't allow her to have it. She will never be able to get that. She would never be able to get that permanence in a conventionally good way, because both rulers of her ascendant, Moon and Venus, are in aversion to the ascendant, meaning neither casts any aspect ray of any kind into Taurus. Practically, this means that Jodi is going to be susceptible to automatic behaviors. Okay. And also there's going to be a lack of oversight, a certain amount of, automatism, but also a certain amount of blindness. The ancient authors in astrology referred to a planet in aversion, referred to a sign whose ruler didn't aspect it as being like a house that the owner leaves the door open to and unlocked. Anybody can go in there. Anybody can take what they want from the house. There's no control over the house at all. So practically, when we have the ascendant ruler not aspecting the ascendant, there are going to be troubles achieving the primary motivation of the ascendant, and there's going to be, like I say, automatic behavior, robotic behaviors on things like habitual behaviors, and a lack of oversight. Sometimes it's definitely a problem, and a huge percentage of people who come to me seeking relief, they have this same situation where the ascendant ruler is not in a classical Ptolemaic aspect with the ascendant, right? So that's an issue. That's telling me that she's not going to be able to achieve those Taurian dreams. Now, let's look at the degree of her ascendant, because, Jodi and Travis have the same ascendant, and yet they're radically different people. The way I do astrology, you'll see that even if two people have the exact same chart, even if their charts are exact replicas of each other, there are techniques to differentiate between them. First of all, the different birthplaces will yield different rates of primary directions, which yields different rates of changeovers in Time Lords, which produces a remarkably different karmic pattern in the life. Okay, but another way that we can differentiate similar charts is through the 12th parts of the ascendant. Right? So Taurus has 12 divisions within it, each one of 2.5 degrees, and 13 degrees 29 minutes of Taurus falls within the 6th such division. So let's count 6 whole signs from Taurus. Taurus is 1, Gemini is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And here we have it. The 12th part of the Taurian ascendant is cast into Libra, the 6th house. This has 2 meanings. First, it adds an important subtone to the ascendant, right? We're going to be able, when we meet Jodi Arias, we're going to pick up on that Libra, this Libran energy where she's yes-manning us, you know what I mean? And then there's going to be this coercive, manipulative Pluto that's in there. We're going to pick up on that too. And finally, we're going to pick up on the low-class nature of the 6th house. The 6th house can be extraordinarily low-class. It can be scuzzy. Okay, I don't mean to offend people who have packed planets in the 6th. That is not a judgment call on you. But nothing really good comes from the 6th house except for your pets. Okay, people who have loaded 6th houses, they sometimes become veterinarians, healthcare workers, because the 6th is a house of illness, or they often wind up dealing with scumbags instead of being scumbags themselves. Maybe they have problems with low-class people. So that's one meaning of the 6th house. There would have been this aura, this patina of sleaziness, or something wrong with Jodi that is picked up due to the 12th part of the ascendant, the Libran 12th part of the ascendant, which is 6th house. So these three factors, Libra, Pluto, and the 6th house, these three features are going to emanate as a subtone of the ascendant based upon the 12th part of that ascendant. Right? So we've already seen a major source of angst in Jodi's life because her ascendant rulers, I count the moon here as the exalted ruler of Taurus as well. The ascendant rulers are both in aversion to it, and so that represents a huge challenge in obtaining what she desires the most in this life, right? Now, she will have tools that she uses to get the material security of Taurus. One of those tools is the sun, because the sun aspects the ascendant with a sextile, thus adding its solar methods to the methods of the ascendant. Right? She will use solar methods to get that material security. So what does that mean? It means that she is going to achieve material security by trying to use glory and publicity, by getting publicity, right? And that has actually happened. Jodi Arias has got more money than me. She might be in prison, but she's got a lot more money than me. I bet you she's got a lot more money than you too. Okay? She can get a lot of commissary items. Let's just put it that way. Right? So the sun, her publicity, is going to achieve the Taurian material security. Right? Her pride, her authority, like being in control of the situation, is what's going to bring her the material security. Right? So that's one method she'll use to get the goals of Taurus. Another method that she's going to use will come from Mars, believe it or not, because Mars, he casts a very minor sesquiquadrate to the ascendant, right? But it helps. It counts. It definitely counts, because she did use that Martian method in order to get the material security, which came from prison, by the way. But she did use that Martian method, the murder, to get the material security. Even discounting prison, murdering Travis Alexander may have brought her closer to that material security somehow, at least in the sense of, first of all, it landed her in jail, but now we can see maybe why she killed Travis, because it wasn't just a simple matter of being ignored. It wasn't just a simple matter of being rejected. It wasn't just that. Rather, there's an element of punishment here. This Mars, I see it as a punitive Mars. If you're not going to give me what I want, then I'll mess you up. But of course, the Mars led her to prison, and prison made her famous, for lack of a better word. Made her rich, too. Kind of. For a prisoner. Now, Mars, as you'll see, and we're going to have a lot to say about everything in the 5th house here, but Mars, you look at his rulerships. He rules the house of prisons. He rules the 7th house and is the exalted ruler of Capricorn, the midheaven. So he's bringing all of these to bear in the 5th house, for one thing, but he also creates these through his aspect to the ascendant, right? So now let's go ahead and look at the 7th house of Jodi Arias. I'm not going to say that Travis fits in here per se. I see him more as a 5th house entity, quite frankly. I see him more as belonging to the 5th house. Sure, the 7th house definitely describes her romance with him, because Scorpio is a sign of intense emotions, and it says something about her relationship with him. But Jodi Arias was a dirty little secret. You know what I mean? Dirty little secrets aren't 7th house entities. They're 5th house entities, and maybe 12th house entities, but not 7th house entities. The 7th house is your spouse, your acknowledged partner, your significant other. And Jodi and Travis, they were significant others for a little while, but Travis put the kibosh on that. Now, the 7th is a house of open confrontation. It's the house of physical violence. Murder, assault is the 7th house. It's also the house of litigation. So Uranus here is not only describing the shock of the murder, it's describing the shock of the trial. Because let me tell you, this trial was a farce. This trial took the entire American legal apparatus and turned it into something out of Barnum and Bailey's or whatever. It made it a circus. It was a carnival. Shocking. The sex tapes. It was a pornographic trial. It really was. So the shock of it is Uranus, right? The shock of it is definitely Uranus. Okay, so let's actually look a little bit closer at Mars and at this conjunction with Saturn in the fifth. The fifth is the house of romances, by the way, the house of sex, the house of pleasures, right? Like I said before, we differentiate between the fifth and the seventh house because the seventh house is a more serious kind of a relationship. The fifth is a bit more frivolous. Now, Mars is in the fifth. By his nature, by himself, his essence is battle, struggling, right? Something that is exciting and risky, but dangerous too. And Mars represents severing ties with people, severing ties with your past. Mars represents moving around, travel. So all of these things pertain to Jodi in a very, very important way, right? A very important way. Obviously, her sex life produced a battle, a struggle, danger. She traveled to go murder Travis. That's a match for Mars. It's also a match for the third house, but I'll get to that in a second. Right? Mars is the planet of ambition. So, with the Mars in the fifth house, Jodi's going to have an ambition to elevate the fifth house sexual relationship into a seventh house permanent relationship. There's going to be great ambition to do that. But she's also going to want to conquer, to be on top. You know what I mean? Little diminutive Jodi Arias with this Mars in the fifth house shows that she's going to want, she might play a submissive role in the bedroom or something, or she might even, try to be demure in the relationship. But the fact of the matter is that she's going to be ambitious and she's going to want to dominate, even if she dominates from the bottom, right? Mars represents criminals too, and is promising some kind of a criminality based upon the fifth house. This fifth house is difficult. Even the Jupiter is difficult, right? But the Saturn-Mars conjunction, I'm not fond of this conjunction at all. We're going to have another conjunction of these two guys in Capricorn, another Earth element here on the 2nd of April, and I like the Capricorn conjunction much better than the Virgo conjunction. The Virgo conjunction of Mars and Saturn is going to describe people who are irritatingly critical, who are process oriented in the sense that, they have a routine for everything. There's a way to open up the soup. There's a way to microwave the soup, a procedure for everything. That's Mars in Virgo. That's Saturn in Virgo. And when you add in Mars to it, then there's going to be ire, irritation, and wrath. Yeah, definitely. This is not a pretty conjunction at all. And it's describing more Jodi's fifth house lover than it is Jodi herself. It's describing a lover who is going to reject her, criticize her, have a routine for everything, like a protocol for doing things, very rigid and strict. And so we see these fifth house planets as individual constituents or phases within a larger fifth house process, right? So what's going to happen first is Jupiter, this detrimented Jupiter in the fifth. That's going to be how the sex starts out, right? It's going to start out in a Jupiterian way, through generosity, or talking about religion, or talking about social issues, or dealing with issues of social prominence, right? Freedom, wealth, easiness, legality, good reputation. That's Jupiter. That's his essence. But because he's in Virgo, those effects will not last. Because he's in detriment, those effects will decay and they'll break down and they will disintegrate. And here we come to the other two phases in the fifth house process. After we've gotten together and done the Jupiter thing, we're having sex and somehow talking about God at the same time, right? Then after that, there comes the big rejection of Saturn. That's the next step in the process. And then what comes later? Mars. And we all know what happened then. Right? So it's showing very vividly what happens as a result of the fifth house sexuality. Saturn, by his own nature, signifies something laborious, something that is hard. He signifies solitude. Now, chew on that for a second. He signifies solitude in the house of frivolity and fun. So we're looking at a situation where after the goodness of the Jupiter phase wears off, then the relationship becomes laborious, and it becomes confining. She's with the guy, but she's not. There's solitude. So Saturn by his own nature is going to produce those things as a result of her sexuality. Now, what we can also say, we can look at the rulerships of these planets, and that tells us a lot. We've already talked a little bit about Mars's rulership of the 12th house and the 7th house. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because Mars is connecting prison, the 12th house, with her sexuality. Mars is connecting the 7th house, litigation and litigation and being sued or going to trial. He represents that and is bringing it to bear in the 5th house. Saturn. And also Mars, as I said, is the exalted ruler of Capricorn, ruling the courts and the judge, etc. Saturn obviously rules Capricorn more forcefully, and Aquarius, and is the exalted ruler of that sleazy, underhanded, sneaky 6th house. Arius' 6th house is sneaky. And Saturn is the exalted ruler of it. So Saturn is going to be creating courts, sleaziness, through the 5th house. Jupiter, what house does Jupiter rule? The 8th, right? Jupiter rules the 8th, and that is the house of death. So Jupiter is creating death through his position right here in the 5th. He's creating death, right? He's linking death. He's also linking the 11th house. And Jodi and Travis met each other at a convention for the business that they worked at. That's an 11th house sort of a thing. Anytime you get together with people for a common cause, that's 11th house. So Jupiter rules that, and he also rules the 8th, and he's connecting them to the 5th. But does this show Travis being murdered? No, it doesn't. You want to see the astrological representation of Travis being murdered? It's right here. Her sun and Mercury. This conjunction right here is a graphical representation of Travis Alexander being stabbed, cut, shot, killed. Right there. Why? Let me explain my logic here, and I'm sure you'll agree with me when I am done. First of all, the Mercury is ruling the 5th house and the 2nd house, right? And he is conjoined with the sun, scorched, right? The 2nd house is something I want to point out to you guys. It's a very morbid house for the 7th house partner, right? Because it's the 8th from the 7th. Here's the 7th house right here, and we're going to count, right? We're going to count that as 1. Sagittarius is 2, Capricorn 3, Aquarius 4, Pisces 5, right? Let me get my marker going. Gosh, my poor marker. And then Aries is 6. Taurus is 7. Gemini is 8. Right? So Gemini is the 8th house, or is 8 houses away from Scorpio. Mercury rules that. It's the death of the other person. Mercury is responsible for that because he rules that house. And he also rules that very difficult 5th house that we saw. Okay? And he is retrograde and scorched. This hurts his body. Now, Travis was murdered in the shower. What representation of running water is better than Cancer? You know what I mean? Cancer is cardinal water. It's rushing. It's moving. It's a shower, right? The sun is the exalted ruler of the 12th house of prisons. The sun is the domicile ruler of the 4th house, and the 4th is a morbid house. Death should not be the first thing you think of when you see the 4th or consider the 4th, but it should not be very far from your mind either. Okay, the 4th is a morbid house. Practitioners of horary will be able to appreciate that the 4th signifies the ends of matters, the ends of things, and this gives it some significance for morbidity. So that's what the sun represents. The sun is also the triplicity ruler of Sagittarius, a very important level of rulership. And here we have Neptune, shower. Right? That's number 2, testimony number 2. So it's more certain. Now, if we were to talk to Jodi before she ever met Travis, we would be well within our rights to worry about her partner getting in trouble around water. You know what I mean? No. Sagittarius, well, before we get to that, let me actually point something else out about her sun. With a woman, you can look at the aspects made by her sun to sort of synopsize her entire romantic history. The aspects the sun forms with other planets shows different relationships with those other planets. So the sun is sextile to Saturn, right? So that shows a Saturnian partner. And in fact, she ended a 4-year relationship with an older man in order to be with Travis, right? The sun casts an inconjunct to Neptune. That shows a relationship that was probably a cruddy one. Trines, Uranus, all of these are different relationships. Well, Travis himself is Mercury conjunct the sun. I'm sorry I can't really draw right here. I'm using my mouse pad. But the thing is, Mercury is as representing a relationship because he's aspecting the sun. Mercury represents Travis. Now, on the other hand, because Mercury is in the third, he represents her younger sister, and the sun represents her younger brother, right? And on the other hand, because Mercury by himself represents siblings and children and learning and teaching and speech, then he has something to say about Jodi's ability to communicate. And being retrograde and scorched and weak in the third, you know that a lot of pure derp is going to come out of her. One wonders the kinds of things that Travis must have had to have heard from this woman, because Mercury representing her faculties of speech and intelligence, it's going to come up with something really, really bizarre given the state of this Mercury. So you can see how intelligent astrology is because it nests meaning within the same planet. And that's how it's done. One should not be stuck on thinking that a planet means one thing. You have to have a fluidity of thinking and be able to change tack very swiftly and say, okay, well, yeah, Mercury is her younger sister, but now, considering Mercury as aspecting the sun, he represents a male who would be a partner for Jodi. In Cancer, scorched and burnt up, ruling the house of the other person's death. And I must point out that the third house is a house of travel. All the cadent houses are houses of travel, maybe with the exception of the sixth. 12th house is also a house that can displace you from your home and make you travel. And Jodi left her home in California, in Wairika, California, and traveled to go murder Travis, right? She staged a burglary, equipped herself with a .25 caliber weapon, and drove all the way to Arizona, planning to murder Travis, knowing she was going to sneak in his house, have sex with him, right? Take him to the moon and back, give him the heavenly home, and then when he turns his back on her in the shower, she's going to become a wife with a knife. Why? Well, the homicide detective speculated that, Travis angered Jodi by cutting her out of a trip to Cancun, right? His company was going to send him on an all-expenses-paid trip to Cancun, and instead of taking Jodi, he took some other lady named Mimi, whom he had a crush on, because Jodi's just his dirty little secret. Jodi is just the woman that he has anal sex with because he can't bring himself to break his law of chastity, right? She's not to be taken seriously. Mimi is. And so he dropped Jodi like a hot potato to take her to Cancun. And so here, this Sagittarius, this traveling Sagittarius, is showing the motive. Sagittarius on the 8th house is showing the motive for why Jodi Arias did what she did to Travis in the shower. In the shower. The entire water element is kind of afflicted too with Scorpio there. You know what I mean? So her emotions are just a nightmare, just totally screwed up. God, there's just so much to see in this chart, but I don't want the video to go on and on and on and on. So I do want to point out just a few more items, and this is the part of fortune in the house of the other person's death, right? Part of fortune in the second house. Part of fortune in most houses is going to translate into money. And I do believe I mentioned that Jodi Arias has more money than we do. So the part of fortune in the house of the other person's death is definitely saying financial gain from killing the other person. I mean, it says that now because we know it after the fact. In the majority of cases, when we have the part of fortune in the second, it will not mean that. The only reason it means that now is because of the bulk of the other testimony. Considering the other testimony, we do not have any justification for saying that this part of fortune is going to be a good one or is going to enrich her for good reasons, right? We don't have that justification. We just don't. The interesting thing is that Travis, let's see if I can show you here. I'm going to switch over to Travis's chart. Travis has also the part of fortune, but in the 8th, right? He has a part of fortune right here in the 8th house. Now, it's not saying that he's going to profit off of his own death. This sort of a placement is just saying there's going to be some renown because of it, and probably money is going to be made. God forgive me for saying this, but his siblings did receive a restitution from the woman who murdered their brother whom they loved very, very much. Their brother who presumably helped take care of them when they were growing up with their nightmare parents. Interestingly enough, Jodi Arias, her parents are charming. She grew up in a very stable, loving home. But Travis, his early childhood was a complete nightmare. He was raised by his grandmother and indoctrinated in the Mormon faith and really made a remarkable success out of himself. But we'll get to Travis later. I just wanted to point out how the parts of fortune for both of these folks wound up straddling the 2nd and 8th house axis. I think that is very, very telling and very important. Well, I think I'm going to wrap it up now. I covered most of the salient points. I hope you enjoyed this analysis. It was a bit longer than I would normally like. But, let me know what you thought about it. Please feel free to like and subscribe, and find me on facebook.com/fadedcrossings. I publish a lot of stuff there that I don't publish up here on YouTube, and I hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day.